centuries, one queen has lived on through history and through legend.
Stone remembers every name written where the ravens came.
She was crowned as an infant, became Queen of France, Queen of Scotland, and one of the most controversial women ever to wear a crown. But was Mary Stuart a victim, a conspirator, or simply a woman trapped inside a world ruled by power, religion, and fear? Imprisoned for almost 19 years, betrayed by those she trusted, and condemned to die by her own cousin.
Hear the bells across the mist. History never forgets.
Her story did not end at the executioner's block. Visitors to castles across Britain still claim to see a solitary woman dressed in black. Footsteps echo through empty corridors. Shadows appear where no one stands.
But never die.
And some believe the spirit of Mary still walks the halls that witness both her triumph and her downfall.
Voices only heaven hears. Chains are lighter than regret.
In this episode of Beyond Haunted UK, we'll separate legend from documented history, explore the political intrigue that shaped a nation, examine the reports of hauntings linked to Mary, and ask why more than 4 centuries after her death, people still speak her name. I'm Jamie. Join me as we step beyond the history books and into the haunting legacy of Mary, Queen of Scots. You're listening to Beyond Haunted UK. Where history meets mystery, and every story has another side. From haunted places and forgotten folklore, to true crime, strange encounters, and the things we still can't explain. I explore the stories, question the evidence, and leave you to decide what you believe.
What we know, what we can't explain.
If you enjoy the journey, follow Beyond Haunted UK on your favourite podcast platform, YouTube, and across social media.
Between the known and the unknown.
Turn down the lights, put on your headphones, and keep an open mind. This is Beyond Haunted UK.
Beyond Haunted UK.
More than 400 years after her execution, people still claim to see Mary, Queen of Scots. And strangely, they don't claim to see her in just one place. Her ghost has been associated with castles and historic buildings across Britain. Places where she lived, places where she was imprisoned, and places connected with her final years of life. There are stories of a woman appearing where nobody should be. Footsteps heard in empty rooms, strange sensations, and figures believed to be a queen who died in 1587. But there is something about these stories that immediately made me curious. How can one person supposedly haunt so many different places? Is Mary somehow still wandering through these locations that defined her life? Could traumatic experiences leave something behind? Or have 4 centuries of storytelling simply taught us to see Mary whenever something unexplained happens in a place connected to her? Because Mary, Queen of Scots has become many things since her death. A martyr, a political threat, or even a tragic queen. And perhaps even a restless spirit. Mary Stuart became Queen of Scotland when she was just 6 days old. She spent much of her childhood in France and eventually married Francis, heir to the French throne, and for a brief period, Mary was both Queen of Scotland and Queen of France. but Francis died young, and in 1561 Mary returned to Scotland. The country she had come home to had changed. Scotland had undergone a Protestant Reformation while Mary remained Catholic, and south of the border sat another queen, Elizabeth I. Because of Mary's ancestry, some Catholics regarded her as having a legitimate claim to the English throne, and that made Mary more than Elizabeth's cousin. It made her potentially dangerous. But Mary's downfall actually began in Scotland. Her marriage to Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, deteriorated badly. In 1566, while Mary was pregnant, her secretary David Rizzio was seized in her presence and murdered by conspirators who included Darnley. Less than a year later, Darnley himself was dead. The house where he was staying was destroyed by an explosion, but his body was discovered outside. Suspicion fell upon several people, including Mary. Then Mary married James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, a man himself suspected of involvement in Darnley's death. The circumstances surrounding that marriage remain controversial, but politically it was dangerous. Mary's enemies moved against her. She was imprisoned, forced to abdicate, and after escaping and failing to regain power, she fled south into England. Now Mary had hoped Elizabeth would help her. Instead, she became her prisoner, and for almost 19 years Mary lived in captivity in England. She wasn't necessarily locked behind bars in a way we might imagined. She had servants, possessions, and she wrote letters and embroidered. At times she was even permitted outside under supervision. But she wasn't free. And this is where the history starts to cross over into the paranormal. One of the places where Mary was held was Tutbury Castle in Staffordshire. Mary disliked Tutbury. It was cold, damp and uncomfortable, and she already suffered from periods of poor health. Today, however, Tutbury has another reputation. It is said to be supposedly haunted. Among the paranormal claims associated with the castle are sightings of a female figure believed by some to be Mary. There have also been reports of unexplained footsteps, sudden cold sensations, and mysterious scents appearing without an obvious source. But to me, this is where I think we need to be careful. The mysterious female apparition, particularly the so-called White Lady, appears again and again in British ghost folklore. So if somebody sees a woman inside a castle where Mary was imprisoned, how do we know it's Mary? Well, the answer is we don't. The experience itself might be completely genuine, but the identity we give that experience could come afterwards. And Tutbury isn't the only place where this happens. Mary spent much of her English captivity under the supervision of George Talbot, the Earl of Shrewsbury, which brought her to Sheffield. She spent periods at Sheffield Castle and Sheffield Manor Lodge, and once again Mary's ghost became part of the folklore. Then there's Bolton Castle in Yorkshire, where Mary stayed in 1568 after fleeing Scotland. And again stories developed of a female apparition associated with her. And there's something I find fascinating about all of this. The Mary we supposedly encounter as a ghost is rarely Mary the young Queen of France. She isn't the powerful Scottish monarch surrounded by her court. She's almost always Mary the prisoner, the woman waiting behind castle walls. And maybe that tells us something about ghosts. Or perhaps it tells us something about ourselves. Because we associate hauntings with trauma, unfinished business and suffering, and Mary's final years would give people plenty of reasons to imagine that something of her might have remained behind. While Mary remained alive, she also remained a threat to Elizabeth. Over the years, plots emerged to remove Elizabeth and replace her with the Catholic Mary. Then in 1586 came the Babington plot. Anthony Babington and his associates planned to assassinate Elizabeth and free Mary, but Elizabeth's spy master Sir Francis Walsingham had penetrated their communications. Secret letters were intercepted, ciphers were decoded, and Mary's correspondence became evidence against her. This is something I've been exploring myself while researching this episode. I've requested access to original material held at the British Library connected with Mary and the events surrounding her final years, and that's something I find fascinating about researching history. Eventually, these enormous historical characters stopped feeling like characters. Someone actually held that paper, someone made those marks, and someone waited for those letters to arrive. And in Mary's case, words written on pieces of paper helped send a queen to her death. Mary was tried at Fotheringhay Castle in October 1586. She argued that as a sovereign queen and not an English subject, Elizabeth had no authority to put her on trial. But it didn't save her. Mary was convicted, and Elizabeth now faced an extraordinary decision. Executing Mary wasn't simply executing another prisoner. Mary was an anointed monarch. Eventually, however, the warrant was signed, and on the morning of the 8th of February 1587, Mary prepared to die. She was 44 years old and had spent almost 19 years in English captivity. Mary entered the Great Hall at Fotheringhay Castle. She prayed and her outer clothing was removed, revealing crimson beneath, a colour that became associated with her presentation of herself as a Catholic martyr. She knelt at the block, and the executioner raised his sword. The first blow failed to sever her head. Another followed, and eventually Mary Stuart was dead. There is one detail from the execution that has always stayed with me. A small dog belonging to Mary had apparently been concealed beneath her clothing. After her death, it emerged and reportedly refused to leave her body. And for a moment, all the politics disappears. The crowns, the conspiracies, Catholic against Protestant, Elizabeth against Mary. What remains is something incredibly human. An animal that doesn't understand why its owner isn't getting back up. Mary was initially buried at Peterborough Cathedral. Years later, after her son James VI of Scotland became James I of England, he ordered his mother's remains to be moved to Westminster Abbey, and that's where Mary rests today. Remarkably, Elizabeth is there too. The Queen who died on the scaffold and the Queen who authorised her execution now rest within the same abbey. But if the ghost stories are true, Mary isn't resting at all, because her presence supposedly remains at Tutbury, at Sheffield, and at Bolton, and at other places associated with her life and captivity, which brings me back to the question I had at the beginning. How can one ghost haunt several locations? One paranormal theory sometimes used to explain this is the idea of a residual haunting. Rather than a conscious spirit remaining somewhere, the theory suggests that intense events might somehow leave an imprint on a location, almost like a recording. Footsteps repeat, a figure walks the same corridor, something appears but doesn't seem aware of the people watching it. Now, there is no established scientific evidence that buildings can record human experiences in this way. But when we're talking about Mary, it's an interesting idea. Perhaps we're not talking about one spirit travelling between castles. Perhaps people believe they're encountering fragments of different moments of the same life. Or perhaps there's another explanation. Us. Imagine walking into Tutbury Castle already knowing Mary's story. You know she lived there, you know she hated the place, you know she was a prisoner, and you know how her life eventually ended. Mary is already there with you, not literally, but she's in your mind. Then you hear something. You catch movement from the corner of your eye. Perhaps for just a second you think you've seen a woman standing at the end of a corridor. Your brain already has an identity waiting for her. It's Mary. That doesn't mean somebody is lying about what they experienced, it simply means unexplained experiences don't arrive with names attached. It's us that gives them names, and sometimes those names have been waiting for centuries. So, was Mary a martyr? To some, absolutely. Was she a monarch? Yes, from the age of 6 days. Was she simply an innocent victim? I don't think history is quite that simple. Mary made questionable decisions. Her relationship with Bothwell remains controversial, and exactly what she knew about plots against Elizabeth continues to be debated. But is she a restless spirit? I don't know, but what I do know is that more than 400 years after the executioner raised his sword inside Fotheringhay Castle, we're still looking for Mary. In castles, in portraits, in handwritten documents, and even in stories. And occasionally, in the shadows. Perhaps Mary's real haunting isn't that one woman somehow walks through half a dozen castles. Perhaps it's that her story has never really left us. But if you were standing alone tonight inside one of the rooms where Mary spent years waiting for freedom, and you heard footsteps approaching from an empty corridor, would history be enough of an explanation? So before you go, don't forget to follow Beyond Haunted UK on Spotify and across social media. Every follow, every share, every comment and every message helps this community grow, and it keeps my stories alive. As usual, you'll find me wherever the strange and the spiritual meet, and until next time, take care and thank you for listening.